Many Brazilian military personnel believe that an absurd order could come at any moment directly from the Brazilian president, demanding that the Brazilian armed forces support Venezuela. This possibility, which previously seemed unlikely, is now being discussed with concern behind the scenes in the barracks. The recent statements by the president in defense of Nicolás Maduro's regime and criticizing the actions of Donald Trump's government in combating transnational trafficking have raised a real alert within the barracks. Tension is rising as the United States pulls back from military ties with Brazil, threatening decades of strategic cooperation. The alliance between Brazil and the United States did not happen by chance. It was built on mutual trust since World War II, when Brazilian soldiers fought alongside the Americans in the Italian campaign. Since then, the two countries have maintained solid bilateral agreements with joint training, military exchanges, and participation in peacekeeping operations. This partnership involves areas such as cyber defense, intelligence, logistics, and combat techniques. The interoperability between the armed forces is the result of years of technical and doctrinal alignment, which is now threatened by ideological political decisions of the current Brazilian government. Welcome to life in the barracks. The Brazilian government's rapprochement with authoritarian regimes such as Nicolás Maduro's in Venezuela and Ali Khamenei's in Iran represents a worrying shift in national foreign policy. This change conflicts with Trump administration guidelines, which consistently opposed dictatorships and supported freedom. Brazil, which has historically sought diplomatic balance, now seems to be choosing sides that disregard human rights and democracy. This new stance has caused discomfort among the Navy, Army, and Air Force military personnel, who see the risk of a break with strategic allies and Brazil's declining position internationally. Suspending the CORE exercises and Operation Formosa, both set for 2025, dealt a major setback to Brazilian troop preparation. These joint trainings with the United States are essential to keep the operational capacity of the armed forces at a high level. Canceling these activities represents not only a technical loss, but also a sign of diplomatic distancing. Officers and enlisted personnel are urging commands to respond firmly to the politicization of international relations. They fear that this break with the United States will become permanent and compromise not only troop readiness, but national security itself. Nicolás Maduro's regime remains in power illegitimately after the 2024 elections, which were marked by fraud and repression. The electoral process was accompanied by kidnappings, arbitrary arrests, and disappearances of opposition members. Venezuela faces widespread fear with a silenced population and collapsing public services. Hyperinflation, food shortages, and mass exodus are direct consequences of poor Chavista management. Supporting a regime like this, which oppresses its own people, is seen by many military personnel as a serious mistake and a deviation from the principles that guide the actions of the Brazilian armed forces. Navy Commander Marcos Sampaio Olsen was among the few who upheld a clear institutional stance. By traveling to the United States himself, he reinforced historical naval ties and stressed the need for ongoing cooperation regardless of political ideologies. In meetings with the Southern Command and American officers, Olson made it clear that the friendship between the two nations should be solid and lasting. His attitude was seen as a gesture of respect for military tradition and the importance of regional stability. On the other hand, the Army commander, Tomas Paiva, and the Air Force commander, Marcelo Damasceno, have taken a more moderate tone. Their speeches are cautious, with underlying messages aimed at preserving hierarchy and avoiding direct confrontations with the government.
Some issues here have been debated, such as the efficiency of military operations. Then people forget, for example, about the truck drivers' strike. The truck drivers' strike that brought the country to a halt in 2018 was resolved by the armed forces.
This stance has been interpreted as an attempt to maintain institutional neutrality, although many military personnel expect firmer positions in the face of threats to the autonomy of the armed forces. Prolonged silence can be mistaken for connivance, and this worries those who defend the integrity of the military institutions. The United States has a long-standing, established influence on the Brazilian armed forces. Weapon systems, training protocols, and operational doctrines were developed based on this partnership. Weakening this bond for ideological reasons is seen as a strategic mistake. Getting closer to left-wing parties and regimes, especially those that disregard democratic values, puts Brazil on a collision course with its historical allies. The country's global credibility is at risk, and the military knows it. The Brazilian Constitution defines the armed forces as state institutions, not government institutions. They exist to protect the Brazilian people against internal and external threats, promoting peace and defending democratic values. When there are signs of politicization within the barracks, the public's trust begins to erode. Institutional neutrality is essential to ensure the country's stability, and any deviation from this principle represents a real risk to democracy. Support for authoritarian regimes like Maduro's creates an ethical conflict within the armed forces. Many military personnel question how far they should follow orders that conflict with constitutional values. Discomfort is increasing, and tension between the barracks and the Palácio do Planalto is evident. Donald Trump has made it clear he won't accept Maduro staying in power. He sees the Chavista regime as a threat to freedom in Latin America. If the Brazilian president decides to take a stand in defense of Maduro, Brazil could enter into a direct collision course with the United States. This possibility raises doubts about how the Brazilian armed forces would react in the face of a diplomatic conflict of this magnitude. The possibility of military involvement alongside an authoritarian regime calls into question the constitutional principles of the defense institutions, which must serve the state and democracy, not political interests. Momentary? Brazilians are starting to notice signs of instability. Questions about the stance of the commanders, the politicization of the barracks, and the silence in the face of authoritarian regimes have become common. Brazil is facing a critical time where the armed forces' neutrality will be key to ensuring democracy and peace in the region. The armed forces' mission is to protect Brazilians, ensure national sovereignty, and promote peace. Any deviation from this mission risks the country's stability. Leave a comment below if you believe that the commanders of the Brazilian armed forces will speak out or remain silent despite the United States-Venezuela crisis. On Life in the Barracks, you stay updated on all military news. Leave your like, subscribe, and watch one of the videos appearing on your screen. See you next time, combatants.